Hello and welcome to the first of our Summer Sundays series. Through the next few weeks, we're going to be looking at the book of Daniel, and we're also going to be having maybe a slightly more compact service than we usually would to give some of our team a break from all the hard work that they put in. As we go through this series, one of the things that it's important to recognize is that the book of Daniel takes place in a time that maybe Daniel and his friends would not have chosen. It takes place in a culture that was hostile to the things that they believed and the ways that they wanted to live. We'll explore more of that as we go through the course, but what's important to remember all the way through is that no matter where they were, no matter what was going on, God was with them and God was in charge, even in moments when it seemed like he wasn't. So as we begin our service together today, why not take some time to worship him through this fantastic song which talks about the way that God not only created but continues to be at work in all of creation.
God of creation, there at the start, before the beginning of time. With no point of reference, you spoke to the dark and fleshed out the wonder of life. And as you speak, 100 billion galaxies are born. In the vapor of your breath, the planets form. And if the stars were made to worship so loud, I can see your heart in everything you made. Every burning star, a signal fire of grace. And if creation sings your praises, so will I. God of your promise, you don't speak in vain, no syllable empty or void. For once you have spoken, all nature and science follow the sound of your voice. As you speak, 100 billion creatures catch your breath, evolving in pursuit of what you said. And if it all reveals your nature so alive, I can see your heart in everything you say. chase down my heart through all of my failure and pride. On a hill you created, the light of the world, abandoned in darkness to die. And as you speak, 100 billion failures disappear. Well, you lost your life so I could find it here. And if you left the grave behind you so alive, I can see your heart and everything you've done. Every part designed in a work of art called love. If you gladly chose surrender, so will I can see your heart a billion different ways. Every precious one, a child you died to save. And if you gave your life to love them, so will I. Like you would again 100 billion times. But what measure could amount to your desire? You're the one who never leaves the one behind.
So, as we begin the first in our series on Daniel, looking at Daniel chapter 1, I want to begin with a question. Sometimes I ask very deep, complicated questions, but today is an easy one. What's your favorite food? What do you love to eat? I know that I really like barbecue chicken, like a Texan pizza, barbecue chicken and everything all over it. And I eat a whole one of those all by myself. I love Chinese, I love Indian, love a Taco Bell as well, actually. What do you love to eat? Sometimes, I don't know if any other guys in relationships have ever experienced this, but sometimes me and my wife have been out and about, and suddenly she said, "You know what? I'm really hungry. I'm really hungry." It happens at home as well, to be honest. We don't have to be out. I'll say, "Oh right, oh okay, yeah, we can sort that." You know, problem solving. And I'll say, "What do you want to eat?" And she says, "I don't know." Now, if I'm hungry, I know what I want to eat. I go and I get the food I want. It doesn't seem to work like that with my wife. And I don't want to generalize too much here, but I have had this experience with other women in my life as well. And there's a trap here. Because what I sometimes try and do is I say, "Well, why don't we have this?" And she'll say, "No." I'll say, "Well, what about this?" And she'll say, "No, I don't want that. What a ridiculous suggestion." And I'll say, "Well, how about this?" And she'll say, "Why do you keep suggesting things that I don't like?" And so I ask again, "What do you want to eat?" And she says, "I don't really know. You choose." Has anyone else ever been in that kind of situation? It is impossible. But Daniel and his friends find themselves in an even more impossible food dilemma in today's story from the Bible. We're going to go to Daniel chapter 1. Feel free to follow this with me if you've got your Bible handy. Daniel chapter 1, starting at verse 1. And this will also give you a bit of the background as to what's going on in this story. So during the 3rd year of King Jehoiakim's reign in Judah, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon was a great foreign empire, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave him victory over King Jehoiakim of Judah and permitted him to take some of the sacred objects from the temple of God. Nebuchadnezzar took them back to the land of Babylon and placed them in the treasure house of his God. And then the king ordered Ashpenaz, his chief of staff, to bring to his palace some of the young men of Judah's royal family and other noble families who'd been brought to Babylon as captives. Select only strong, healthy, and good-looking young men, he said. Make sure they are well-versed in every branch of learning, are gifted with knowledge and good judgment, and are suited to serve in the royal palace. Train these young men in the language and literature of Babylon. The king assigned them a daily ration of food and wine from his own kitchens. They were to be trained for 3 years and then would enter the royal service. Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were 4 of the young men chosen, all from the tribe of Judah. The chief of staff renamed them with Babylonian names. Daniel was called Belteshazzar, Hananiah was called Shadrach, Mishael was called Meshach, and Azariah was called Abednego. So these 4 young men, they've been taken from their homes by a foreign power. The Babylonian Empire was a brutal foreign power. They've taken these young men, they've destroyed their homes, likely killed their families, taken them away. It essentially forced them to spend 3 years studying Babylonian culture and all kinds of other complex concepts that will help them to serve the empire that has just kidnapped them. And then they will enter the king's service. And as part of this, they're to be fed well. They're to be fed from the royal table, so that incredible luxuries. They're going to be well taken care of as they learn and train. But here's the problem: the food from the royal table would often have been sacrificed to the Babylonian gods. The meats that they were to be fed would have been offerings to the Babylonian gods. And the Babylonian kings were often referred to as god kings, as deities themselves, or as though they were in some way gods. And so often the food of the royal table would have been offered to the king of Babylon as his offering. Now, this was a problem for Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and Belteshazzar, as they were now known. We'll just call Belteshazzar Daniel by his original name, because it makes it less of a mouthful. But this was a problem for them, because the reason that the people of Judah had been taken in the first place was that they'd been unfaithful to God. They'd been unfaithful to Yahweh, the God of Israel and Judah. And so God had allowed them. Do you remember at the beginning it said this, the Lord gave King Nebuchadnezzar victory over Judah. God let it happen as a punishment for their unfaithfulness to him. So what are Daniel and his friends going to do? They're in this foreign land. They're being forced to train, and they're being told, you will eat this food from the king's table, sacrificed to idols. Let's read on from verse 8. But Daniel was determined not to defile himself by eating the food and wine given to them by the king. He asked the chief of staff for permission not to eat these unacceptable foods. And now God steps in again. In verse 9 it says, God had given the chief of staff both respect and affection for Daniel. But he still responded, I'm afraid of my lord the king, who's ordered that you eat this food. If you become pale and thin compared to the other youths your age, I'm afraid the king will have me beheaded. Daniel spoke with the attendant who'd been appointed by the chief of staff to look after them. And he said, please test us for 10 days on a diet of vegetables and water. Vegetables and water. At the end of 10 days, see how we look compared to the other young men who are eating the king's food. Then make your decision in light of what you see." And the attendant agreed to Daniel's suggestion, and he tested them for 10 days. And at the end of the 10 days, Daniel and his 3 friends looked healthier and better nourished than the young man who'd been eating the food assigned by the king. So after that, the attendant fed them only vegetables instead of the food and wine provided for the others. Now, God gave these 4 young men an unusual aptitude for understanding every aspect of literature and wisdom. And God gave Daniel the special ability to interpret the meanings of visions and dreams. We call this a spiritual gift. When the training period ordered by the king was complete, the chief of staff brought all the young men to King Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them, and no one impressed them as much as Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And so they entered the royal service. And whenever the king consulted them in any matter requiring wisdom and balanced judgment, he found them 10 times more capable than any of the magicians and enchanters in his entire kingdom. See, Daniel and his friends had to make a choice. They could go with the luxuries put in front of them and compromise their relationship with God, or they could be faithful to God and eat only vegetables and water placed in front of them. And of course, they choose faithfulness to God. And you might say, well, that's obvious because they've seen the consequences of not obeying God. They're where they are because they haven't obeyed God. But actually, a lot of the time as humans, the problem that's right in front of us is the one we respond to. And so you might have said it'd be quite natural for Daniel and his friends to say, well, we could get killed. We could get in so much trouble if we don't just go along with what we're supposed to do here. We'll just eat the food and still love God and it'll be fine. But so often it's those little compromises, those tiny little ways we compromise on what God calls us to that can go on to have massive impacts in the rest of our lives. See, the whole thing that the Babylonians wanted to do through this education system and the use of this food sacrificed to idols was they wanted to change the identity of the people they conquered. They wanted people to stop thinking of themselves as Jews, the people of Judah, the followers of God, and start thinking of themselves as Babylonians. And the world around us, it can have that same effect on us as Christians, as followers of Jesus, as people trying to follow God in a strange world that is different to the way he calls us to be. And it's so easy to do. It is so easy for us to say, well, this is just the way the world is. I'm sure I can be a follower of God and, make a few little tweaks here and there to the way he calls me to live. I'm sure I can drink a bit more than I know I should do. I'm sure I can have a relationship with someone that God says it's not ideal, but I'm sure I can make that compromise and still follow him. I'm sure I can join in with the banter about that person who is a bit of a loser, and it won't really affect my character and my relationship with God. It's just a bit of banter. I'm sure I can, just get really into watching things that aren't so good for me. and it won't really affect who I am. We can make those compromises so easily when we want to conform to the culture around us, when we want people's approval instead of God's approval. But here is the amazing thing that we see in this story of Daniel, and that we see as a principle of following God. When we align with God's way, God raises us up in the estimation of other human beings. It says in the book of Acts chapter 2 that the disciples were living for Jesus, going all out for him, sharing what they had with people, worshipping God daily in the temple courts, meeting together in different homes to seek Jesus, living in a way that was different to the culture around them. And then it goes to say at the end of Acts chapter 2 that they had the approval of all people, and daily God added to their number those who were being saved. You see, when we live God's way, by his values, trying to align with the character that we see in Jesus, it's not just good for us, it's good for the people around us. And God honors it and God raises us up. The Bible says so many times, you reap what you sow. And this is not karma. This is not saying if you do good things happen to you. If you do bad things happen to you. That's garbage. I know plenty of people who do incredibly good things and still terrible things come along in their lives. Karma is garbage. But when the Bible talks about reaping what you sow, it's about the way that our decisions shape our characters. It's about the way that our choices shape the outcomes that we do have power over in our own lives. And there's also a spiritual factor to it, in that God will not bless evil deeds, but God will bless goodness. God will bless our desires to please him and honor him. Do you know, sometimes even if it doesn't work out the way you hope to, our desire to please him and to honor him is enough. And just in the case of Daniel and all of his friends, we can be a blessing to others when we align ourselves with God's way of living. Because the impact of what Daniel and his friends chose to honor God didn't just have a good outcome for them, that they got a high position, the respect and honor of the king. It says that the king consulted them on all matters to do with the kingdom, the whole empire of Babylon, and they were 10 times wiser than anyone else on the king's team. That means the kingdom of Babylon, the empire of Babylon, all of the people who lived there, all of the citizens, whether those in power or those at the bottom of the tree, they were all better off, because Daniel and his friends were obedient to God. And so God empowered them and equipped them to give wise advice to the king. Do you want to be blessed and be a blessing to the world around you? I wonder how you're aligning yourself with the ways of God as Daniel and his friends did, and where you and I, where might we be compromising on who God calls us to be and how God calls us to live? I want to challenge you today. If you know there's a compromise that you're making, why not grab a bit of paper, write that thing down, ask God to help you to stop that compromise, and then tear that up, throw it in the bin as a prophetic sign to God that you want that to stop, that you want that to change. Is there a habit in your life that you need to break, but you're struggling to do it yourself? Well, I just pray today that God will help you to break that habit, to end that thing that is having a hold on your life that it shouldn't have. Maybe it's even, as in the case of Daniel and his friends, maybe it's food. Maybe food has too much of a grip on your life. Maybe it's the comfort you go to. And God wants to say, I can break that. I've got a friend called Jordan, who, as part of his church, they regularly do what they call a Daniel fast. They just switch to eating just vegetables and water for 10 days to ask God to meet with them, to guide them in his purposes, to speak to them about the future of their church. I wonder if a Daniel fast could even be an exciting adventure that you'd like to go on. Whatever God is saying to you today, I pray that in every way you will be able to conform to his ways of living. As it says in Romans 12, do not conform any longer to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your heart and mind. Then you will know his perfect will, his good and pleasing and perfect will. May the Lord be with you today as you seek to do and discover that perfect will he has for your life. God bless you. I'll see you soon